I mean, when you sign a standard contract today, say for a house or a car loan or even just, the terms of service on some new software,
Yeah.
you expect it to be a pretty straightforward exchange.
Right. You give them money, they give you the product.
Exactly. I give you money or I give you my data and you give me the thing. It's highly transactional, it's visible, and it's clean. We kind of just operate on this assumption that words mean exactly what we think they mean.
Yeah, we really rely on that simplicity, don't we? I mean, you fulfill the terms or you don't. It's super comforting to think of agreements in that kind of binary way.
Yeah.
We like our transactions to be, easily digestible, clearly categorized.
But then you hand that exact same document over to like a forensic auditor or a constitutional lawyer.
Oh, yeah. Then the fun begins.
Right. Suddenly that simple piece of paper becomes an absolute minefield. The clean lines just completely disappear.
You realize you've just stepped into this landscape of hidden clauses and logical dependencies.
This murky legal territory. You find out that a word like ownership or, I don't know, liability might have 3 completely different operational definitions just depending on which paragraph you happen to be reading.
It basically becomes the definition of a logical trap. You realize that the vocabulary you thought you completely understood has all these depths and implications you never even considered.
Right.
The whole structural integrity of the agreement might rest on a single, seemingly insignificant premise hidden on page 40. And if that premise fails, the whole thing collapses.
The whole contract collapses. And that is exactly the landscape we are walking into for this deep dive today.
Yes, we are.
If you are listening to this, you are the kind of dedicated learner who just doesn't shy away from dense, complex material. You're used to encountering these massive texts, reading between the lines, and really trying to extract the core architecture of the ideas inside them.
Which is exactly what we need for today's topic.
Right. Well, our mission today is to conquer an absolute mountain of 17th century logic. We are looking at John Owen's 1647 masterpiece, The Death of Death in the Death of Christ.
Such an intense title, honestly.
It really is.
Yeah.
And specifically, we are setting up camp in Book 3 of that text. But before we get into the weeds, we should probably set some ground rules, right?
Yeah, it is really crucial to set the ground rules right out of the gate here because, while the text we're examining is inherently theological, written by this Puritan theologian during the English Civil War, our goal today is entirely analytical.
Just purely analytical.
Exactly. We are not here to take sides in a 400-year-old religious debate.
Right.
We aren't endorsing the specific doctrines Owen is arguing for, and we definitely aren't condemning the doctrines he is arguing against.
Right. We are strictly mapping the architectural brilliance of his deductive reasoning. Because, frankly, whether you agree with his foundational premises or you totally reject them, the way this guy's mind works is just a marvel of formal logic.
It really is.
He doesn't just argue, he audits.
He absolutely audits. And to understand what he is auditing, we need to, establish the stakes.
Lay it out for us.
So in 1647, Owen was taking aim at this theological framework broadly known as Arminianism, or, in the specific context of this book, the doctrine of universal redemption.
Okay.
The proponents of this view basically argued that Christ died to save every single human being without exception. They believed his sacrifice was this general ransom paid for the entire world.
Which sounds pretty straightforward so far.
Right, but here is the catch. They argued that this universal payment was conditional. Its actual final application depended on the individual person choosing to believe.
Okay, and on a surface level, that sounds incredibly reasonable. It really appeals to our modern sensibilities, doesn't it?
It does. It's very appealing.
It's this universal offer made to everyone, but it requires human free will to activate it. It feels fair. It feels democratic,
It does feel fair, which is exactly why it was, and honestly still remains, such a popular viewpoint. But Owen looks at that democratic structure, and he just sees a mathematical impossibility.
A mathematical impossibility. I love that phrasing.
Yeah, in the first 2 books of this massive treatise, he's basically playing defense. He lays down his foundation, establishes his definitions of who God is and what a covenant is, and he sets the board.
Right.
But when you hit book 3, the entire tone of the text just shifts. He goes on the offensive.
Oh, he completely stops building his own house and just brings a wrecking ball to his opponent's house.
A very precise wrecking ball.
And he doesn't do it by just, throwing competing Bible verses at them or making these emotional appeals. He builds a series of absolute logical traps.
Traps that are just perfectly constructed.
Right. He uses these dilemmas that are so tightly built that his philosophical opponents have spent nearly 4 centuries trying to escape them. He forces them to look at the literal dictionary definitions of the words they're using and the inescapable logical conclusions of their own premises.
He essentially acts as that forensic auditor you mentioned earlier. He takes the contract of universal redemption, puts it under a microscope, and starts testing the load-bearing walls.
And what's the first wall he hits?
The very first load-bearing wall he attacks in Book 3 is the concept of a condition. He really wants to know the exact mechanics of this new covenant and how conditional logic functions within it.
Okay, let's follow him right into that trap then. In Book 3, Chapter 2, Owen introduces what he calls argument the third.
Right.
He takes the universalist claim that Christ purchased salvation for everyone, but, conditionally, meaning it only applies if a person believes. And he asks a fascinatingly simple question.
And this question is fatal to their argument. He asks if Christ purchased salvation for all men conditionally, did he also purchase the condition itself?
Meaning, did Christ purchase the faith? Like the actual human belief that is required to unlock the salvation?
Precisely. If faith is the key that unlocks the door to salvation, Owen is asking, well, did Christ purchase the key along with the door?
Wow, okay.
It is a binary question. The answer has to be yes or it has to be no. And Owen just meticulously walks through both options to show how each one completely destroys the universalist position.
Okay, I want to play the role of the universalist here and try to navigate this trap. Let's start with option A. Let's say the answer is yes. Yes, Christ purchased the condition. He bought the faith for everyone.
Okay. If he procured the condition absolutely for everyone, then everyone must infallibly receive that faith.
Right.
The logic is unbreakable. If God purchases something for you, he delivers it. If everyone receives the faith, then everyone meets the condition. And if everyone meets the condition, then absolutely everyone is saved. There is no one left in hell.
Oh, I see. But both sides of the debate in 1647, and pretty much anyone looking at the world, admit that not everyone is saved.
Exactly.
The opponents Owen is arguing against, they don't believe in ultimate absolute universalism where every single human goes to heaven. They believe people perish. So I guess I can't choose option A. The answer cannot be yes.
So you are forced to choose option B. You have to say no. Christ did not purchase the condition. He bought the salvation, the potential for deliverance. But humans have to supply the faith themselves out of their own free will and natural ability.
Which, again, sounds reasonable to modern ears, right? Humans have to bring something to the table. We have to have some skin in the game. It preserves human autonomy.
It preserves autonomy, sure, but it introduces a catastrophic contradiction in the theology.
How so?
Well, Owen points out that in the theological framework both sides actually agree upon, faith is considered a good thing. It is a spiritual gift. Furthermore, both sides agree that Christ's death bought all good spiritual things for humanity.
I see the walls closing in.
Exactly. If Christ's death bought all good spiritual things, and faith is a good spiritual thing, but he didn't buy faith, then his redemption isn't actually complete.
Right, he didn't buy everything necessary.
Exactly. He left the most crucial piece, the activation mechanism, completely out of the transaction.
Well, wait, couldn't the universalist just say, fine, he didn't buy it, it's a condition we have to meet, that's just how the contract is written, deal with it?
They could try. But that is where Owen exposes the infinite circularity of their logic. If you say Christ procured salvation for us on the condition that we believe, but he did not procure the belief itself, then humans must generate it entirely on their own from a state of, well, spiritual bankruptcy.
Yeah.
But if faith is required to unlock salvation, what is required to unlock faith?
That's a coding nightmare.
It is an infinite loop. If the condition is procured on another condition, we just start the query all over again. You run in a circle until a condition's end somewhere.
Wow.
Owen argues that a condition cannot be its own cause. If salvation requires faith and you don't have faith, how do you get it? If you say by choosing it, well, what conditions your choice? You end up in a philosophical regress that never actually saves anyone.
Okay, so it's kind of like, imagine a billionaire buys you a gift card to the most exclusive, expensive restaurant in the world. It has $10,000 loaded onto it.
I like where this is going.
Right, so it's sitting right there on the table.
Yeah.
But the billionaire tells you, you can only use this gift card if you activate it with a second, secretly hidden gift card.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So if the billionaire didn't pay for the activation card, and you have to somehow magically find it and buy it yourself, even though you're completely flat broke, did he really buy you dinner?
Exactly.
Owen is essentially asking his opponents, who paid for the activation card?
That is a perfect way to conceptualize the dilemma. Who paid for the activation card? Owen's point is that if salvation is conditional in the way his opponents claim, and the condition isn't provided by the purchaser, you get stuck in this infinite loop of unmet conditions.
Right.
Therefore, Owen concludes, the premise must be wrong. Christ must have procured the faith itself. He absolutely must have purchased the activation card, or the whole transaction is null and void.
But wait, we already established earlier that if he purchased the faith for everyone, then everyone would be saved. Which isn't true.
Exactly. And here is the absolute genius of his deduction. Since he must have purchased the faith, but we observe that not everyone actually has faith, the only remaining logical conclusion is that he only purchased that faith for a specific, limited group of people.
The elect.
Precisely. For Owen, if Christ purchased the faith for everyone, universal salvation would be the mathematical result. Since that isn't the reality, the purchase itself must have been targeted, limited, and highly specific.
He didn't buy a potential salvation for everyone. He bought actual salvation, including the faith required to receive it, for a specific group.
You nailed it.
Think about the implications of this kind of conditional logic outside of just 17th century theology. It applies to reading the fine print in modern legal contracts or even writing software code, like we mentioned.
Oh, absolutely.
If you create a loop where action A requires condition B and condition B requires action A, your program just crashes. It's a fatal error. Owen is basically looking at the theological code his opponents have written, running a diagnostic, and pointing out the fatal loop.
It really demonstrates the absolute necessity of tracking a premise to its ultimate conclusion. You cannot simply introduce a massive variable like conditional human belief without accounting for the origin, the procurement, and the mechanics of that variable.
Right, you can't just wave it away.
No, you can't. Owen refuses to let his opponents use faith as this magic wand to wave away their logical inconsistencies. He demands to see the receipt. He demands to know where the faith came from in the transaction.
And once he forces them to admit they don't have a receipt for the condition, he doesn't let up. He just keeps going.
He is relentless.
He moves right from the logical dependencies into the literal vocabulary they're using. Because if the contract is broken in its conditions, how are they even defining the actual event? Which brings us to a fascinating turn in Book 3, specifically in Chapter 5. He labels this argument 11, and he basically decides to look at the dictionary.
This is where his background as an Oxford scholar truly shines. He examines the Greek words used in the original biblical texts for redemption, specifically the words lutrosis or apolutrosis.
We throw the word redemption around a lot today, a redemption arc in a movie or redeeming a coupon at the grocery store. It has become a very soft, sort of pliable word.
It really has. But in the first century Greco-Roman world and in Owen's strict 17th century reading, these words were not vague spiritual metaphors. Not at all. They had highly specific, legally binding transactional meanings. They were drawn directly from the context of the slave market and prisoner of war camps. The words literally mean deliverance from captivity by the payment of a price.
Okay, so there's a price involved.
Yes, and that price, the ransom itself, is the lutron.
Deliverance by a price. So it's essentially a two-part definition.
It is an unbreakable composite. The word inherently contains two elements that absolutely must occur simultaneously in reality. First, the payment of a sufficient price, and second, the actual literal freeing of the captive.
No.
You cannot have the concept of lutrosis without both elements functioning. If you pay the price but the captive remains enslaved, you do not have redemption. And if the captive goes free without a price being paid, you have liberation or escape, but you do not have redemption.
Okay, let's put this in a modern real-world scenario to really grasp it. Imagine I walk into a downtown courthouse.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
I go up to the clerk and I say, I want to pay the exact bail money demanded for every single person currently sitting in the county jail. I slide a briefcase full of cash across the counter. The judge accepts the money. The ledger shows a zero balance for every single inmate. I expect those cells to be emptied immediately.
No, you have every legal right to expect that.
Right. But if I pay the money and the judge accepts the money and I walk outside to wait, and a week later, the prisoners are still sitting in their cells wearing orange jumpsuits. I haven't actually ransomed anyone.
No, you haven't.
I've just given the court free money. I can't go around town claiming I am the redeemer of the county jail if no one actually walked free.
That is the stark, unyielding reality Owen is forcing his opponents to face. He writes this incredibly sharp, almost sarcastic summary of the universalist position.
What does he say?
He basically says that the concept of universal redemption presents an impossible legal and linguistic contradiction. He writes, "A price is paid for all, yet few delivered. The judge satisfied, the jailer conquered, and yet the prisoner enthralled."
Enthralled meaning still enslaved, still in chains.
Correct. Owen is pointing out the sheer absurdity of the claim. How can you look at a world where the vast majority of people remain in spiritual captivity, facing eternal consequences, and claim that a ransom was paid for the entire world?
You just can't.
For Owen, saying universal redemption when most people perish is an oxymoron. It is a fundamental contradiction in terms. He claims it is as irreconcilable as saying Roman Catholic to a 17th century Protestant.
Oh, wow.
The two concepts simply cannot exist in the same mathematical reality.
Think about how often we experience this exact kind of linguistic drift today. We hear words on the news or in marketing like unprecedented or literally or guaranteed, and they're used in ways that completely violate their actual historical definitions.
All the time.
Someone will say, "I literally died laughing." No, you didn't. You figuratively died laughing. Owen is basically demanding absolute linguistic precision. He is acting as the grammar police for theology.
That's a great way to put it.
He's saying, if you invoked the Greek word for ransomed, you are legally obligated to the definition of that word. And that word means someone actually walked out the prison doors.
He insists that you cannot stretch a rigid legal term to fit your emotional preference for how the universe should work. If the word means actual deliverance, and actual deliverance did not happen for everyone, then the ransom simply could not have been paid for everyone. He is methodically stripping away the emotional comfort of the word universal and forcing a confrontation with the cold mechanics of the word ransom.
It's just brutal logic.
It is. If the ransom is universal, the freedom must be universal. Since the freedom is not universal, the ransom was not universal.
It is so rigorous. He just closes every single exit door. He locks you in a room with the dictionary and refuses to let you leave until you agree on the definition.
And this methodology of defining terms doesn't stop at the concept of a ransom either.
Where does he go next?
Well, if a ransom means actual, literal freedom from captivity, what does that freedom look like relationally? I mean, a released prisoner isn't just out of a cell. They have a new relationship with the judge and the state.
Okay, yeah.
This bridges us directly into Owen's thoughts on reconciliation, which he tackles in Chapter 6 of Book 3.
Reconciliation. Another word that sounds incredibly warm and fuzzy to us today. Two friends having a fight and then hugging it out,
Exactly. It had become a somewhat fuzzy emotional term in the debates of his time as well, but Owen, as always, sharpens it back into a precise, dual-edged instrument. He defines reconciliation not as a feeling of goodwill, but as a two-way, objective, relational action.
Break down that two-way action for us. What are the two sides?
According to Owen's rigorous reading of the text, Christ's sacrifice must achieve two things simultaneously to accomplish true reconciliation. First, it must turn God's righteous wrath away from human beings. The judge's anger at the crime must be appeased.
Okay, that's one side.
Right. Secondly, it must turn human enmity, which is the natural hatred or rebellion humans have toward God, away from God. It must resolve the conflict from both sides of the relational equation. The judge pardons the rebel, and the rebel lays down their arms.
Okay, hold on. The math isn't adding up for me here. I need to push back on this on behalf of the Universalist position. If the Universalists are arguing that Christ died for every single person on earth, and his death achieves this two-way reconciliation, then technically God's wrath has been turned away from every single human being universally.
Following you so far.
So God is no longer angry at anyone. The judge has issued a universal pardon.
That is the logical extension of their premise, yeah.
So how does anyone end up in hell? How can anyone, according to their own doctrine, face the wrath of God at the end of time? If the wrath was removed at the cross, where does the wrath at the final judgment come from? Did God just get angry again?
And you have just articulated Owen's exact trap. That is the precise mathematical inconsistency he uses to dismantle their argument.
Oh, man.
If both parties are reconciled universally, meaning if God's wrath is universally removed by the cross and human enmity is universally meant to be removed, then no one can possibly remain under wrath. The relationship is entirely permanently healed across the board.
But, once again, both sides of the 17th century debate agree that people do remain under wrath. The Bible they both read is full of warnings about final judgment. And just, observation of the world shows people living in rebellion.
Exactly. So Owen says, look at the logical dependency. We have a contradiction between the premise and the observed outcome. If the ultimate outcome is that some people remain under wrath and face judgment, then the initial premise that Christ died to reconcile everyone universally must be false.
It has to be false.
It is logically impossible for someone to be fully reconciled to a judge, have the judge's wrath permanently removed by a legal substitute, and then still be sentenced to the maximum penalty by that exact same judge for the exact same crimes.
That would make the judge crazy.
Right. A just judge cannot punish a crime that has already been fully reconciled. Therefore, Owen concludes, Christ could only have died to reconcile those who are ultimately actually reconciled.
The psychological weight of this argument for Owen's original readers in 1647 must have been staggering. He is methodically stripping away this very comforting, broad idea of a universal, general love that God has for everyone.
It's a very heavy realization.
The universalist view is very warm. It says God did everything he could for everyone. But Owen says that view actually makes God look incompetent. He is replacing it with something entirely different.
He is replacing a broad, potential, but ultimately ineffective love with a highly specific, unbreakable, targeted intervention. For Owen, love isn't defined by how widely it is offered. Love is defined by its power to actually save.
It's like the difference between a doctor during a massive plague. The universalist doctor stands on a balcony and throws 1,000,000 bottles of medicine into a chaotic crowd, just hoping people catch them, hoping they read the label, hoping they swallow the pills.
Right, hoping for the best.
The medicine is available to everyone, universally, but thousands of people don't catch it or they refuse to take it and they die.
A tragic outcome, despite a universal provision.
Right. Now contrast that with Owen's doctor. This doctor walks into the hospital ward, identifies a specific group of patients, walks right up to their beds, and injects the cure directly into their veins. Every single patient he treats survives. 100% success rate.
That's a powerful image.
The first doctor feels more generous because he covered more area and gave everyone a chance. But the second doctor is the only one who guarantees survival.
That analogy perfectly captures the tension here. It raises a profound question about how we define goodness or efficacy, not just in theology, but in any system.
Exactly.
Is a mechanism or an intervention good simply because it is offered universally, even if it fails frequently due to human error? Or is a mechanism good because it achieves a 100% success rate within a defined parameter?
Right. In modern terms, is the policy good because of its intentions or because of its outcomes?
Exactly. And Owen argues fiercely for outcomes. He is incredibly uncomfortable, theologically and logically, with the idea of a divine action failing to achieve its stated end.
He hates the idea of failure.
Right. If God sets out to reconcile humanity, and humanity isn't fully reconciled, Owen believes you have just made God a failure. To protect the sovereignty and success of God, Owen limits the scope of the mission to ensure its absolute success.
Which brings us to the absolute pinnacle of this legal argument. This mathematical inconsistency regarding reconciliation, the idea of wrath returning after it has been removed, this leads directly into what I think is the crown jewel of Book 3.
Oh, absolutely.
This is Argument the 13th, where Owen explores the legal satisfaction of Christ.
If you thought the forensic auditing was intense before, this is where Owen brings out the heavy machinery. He takes the concept of satisfaction and puts it under the harshest legal light possible.
Let's see.
In jurisprudence, both in 17th century English common law and today, the satisfaction of a debt means one of two very specific things. It means either the original debtor pays exactly what is owed, or a substitute provides an acceptable value that the creditor agrees clears the ledger.
So we are back in the courtroom. We are looking at the great ledger of human sin, the debts owed to a just God. Owen says that in God's response to Christ's death on the cross, there are two distinct legal acts occurring simultaneously. An act of supreme sovereignty and an act of strict justice.
Let's separate those out because the distinction is totally vital. The act of supreme sovereignty is God agreeing to accept a substitute in the first place. The law demands that the soul that sins must die. God, in his sovereignty, agrees to let someone else pay that debt.
He didn't have to do that.
No, he didn't. That is his sovereign prerogative. But the act of justice is the actual processing of the payment. Once the substitute is accepted, strict justice demands that the payment must perfectly match the debt. And this is where Owen presents his devastating double payment dilemma.
I love the double payment dilemma. It is a masterpiece of logic. We have to walk through this slowly, step by step.
Okay, Owen sets up a trilemma, actually. Three distinct possibilities regarding the scope of Christ's payment. He asks his Universalist opponents a series of questions regarding what exactly Christ paid for.
What's the primary question?
The primary question is, did Christ fully satisfy God's justice for all the sins of all men? And let's break down the possibilities. Possibility one, did he pay for some of the sins of all men?
Okay, if he only paid for some sins, say he paid for all the big sins, but left the minor infractions on the ledger, then every single person still has remaining sins.
Right.
And in this theological framework, even one remaining sin condemns a person. So if he only paid for some sins, no one is completely clean and no one is saved. The Universalists can't choose that option because they believe people do get saved.
Correct. Possibility one is eliminated. So we move to possibility two. Did he pay for all the sins of some men?
Well, that's John Owen's position. That's the limited atonement view. He paid every single debt for a specific group, the elect. But the Universalists obviously can't choose that option either because it destroys their core premise of universal scope.
Which leaves them cornered into possibility three. Did he pay for all the sins of all men?
This is their golden ticket. They have to say yes. He paid for every single sin ever committed by every single human being who will ever live. The ledger is entirely universally clear.
But if the ledger is completely clear for the entire human race, Owen asks the obvious question, why then are some people not saved? Why do some people still perish in hell if their ledger has a zero balance?
And this is where the Universalists brings what they think is their trap card. They say, they aren't saved because of their unbelief. The payment was made for all their sins, but they refuse to believe the gospel, and that specific act of unbelief is what condemns them.
Yes, that is their defense.
Oh, but the counter-trap. The counter-trap is so good.
Owen waits for them to say that, and then he asks one simple, quiet, devastating question. Is not unbelief a sin?
Boom. Mic drop.
It shatters their entire argument. If unbelief is a sin, and Christ paid for all the sins of all men as they just claimed, then didn't Christ pay for the sin of unbelief too?
It is brilliant. It's like a bank forgiving your entire mortgage. You get the paperwork in the mail, debt cleared, you celebrate.
They throw a party?
Exactly. But then 6 months later, the bank forecloses on your house anyway.
Yeah.
You drag them to court, and the bank manager says, well, we foreclosed because you failed to send us a handwritten thank you note for the forgiveness.
That's ridiculous.
But then your lawyer pulls out the original forgiveness clause, and it explicitly states, this forgiveness covers all past, present, and future debts, including any failure to send a thank you note. The bank specifically covered the exact infraction they are now trying to use to foreclose on you. They have no legal right to take the house.
That is precisely Owen's argument regarding divine justice. He states that it is a supreme violation of justice for God to demand a second payment, meaning eternal punishment, from a sinner, if Christ has already made full legal satisfaction for that specific person's sins, including the sin of their unbelief.
You just cannot double charge a debt. If the debt was paid by the substitute, the original debtor is legally free. To charge them again is basically extortion.
Yes. For God to exact the penalty from the sinner after Christ has already paid it would make God unjust. It would make him a corrupt judge who takes the bail money from the substitute, cashes the check, and still executes the prisoner.
Wow.
Therefore, because both sides agree that God is perfectly just, and because both sides agree that people do face the ultimate penalty for their sins, the only logical, mathematically sound conclusion is that Christ did not make satisfaction for the sins of those who perish.
His satisfaction must be limited strictly to those who are actually saved. It is checkmate. In terms of pure deductive logic, there is nowhere for the opponent to move. If you agree to his definitions of satisfaction and justice, the conclusion is inescapable. The logical vice just keeps tightening.
It really does.
And it's important to note here that Owen is operating strictly within the agreed-upon definitions of his era. He is taking the Universalists' own definitions of God's justice and turning it into a weapon against them.
It is a closed system of logic executed flawlessly. And that brings us to the final major piece of the puzzle in Book 3.
The concept of merit.
Yes. If Christ completely legally satisfied the debt for a specific targeted group of people without any possibility of failure, what exactly did he earn for them through that transaction? We've talked about what he removed, the debt, the wrath, but what did he affirmatively acquire?
Right. Merit. We hear that word all the time today. Merit-based pay, a meritocracy, getting a merit badge. It usually just means you did a good job and deserve a pat on the back or a bonus.
Right, it's very casual today.
But in 17th century theological and legal terms, it carries a much heavier, more specific weight. Owen outlines this in Argument 14th.
He focuses on the underlying Greek concept of peripoio, which translates roughly to purchased or merited. And in Owen's strictly legal framework, merit is not a vague concept of being a good person.
No.
No, it is a specific action that legally obligates the agent, in this case, God the Father, to provide a reward out of strict justice, not just out of general kindness or charity.
Let me make sure I grasp the distinction here. If I see a homeless person and give them $50, that is charity. I wasn't obligated to do it. But if I hire a contractor to fix my roof and they work for 40 hours and I give them a check, I am not being charitable.
Right, you owe them.
I am paying a debt.
Yeah.
Their work merited the wages. I'm legally obligated by justice to pay them.
Exactly. Owen argues that Christ, through his flawless obedience and his sacrificial death, performed an action of such infinite value that it legally merited grace and glory for those in whose place he stood. It obligated divine justice to apply those benefits to them. It wasn't just a gesture that made God feel charitable toward humanity. It was a transaction that secured a legal right to salvation for the elect.
But this is where the modern reader, and honestly many readers in Owen's day, hit a massive emotional roadblock. I have to ask the emotional question here.
I think I know what's coming.
Doesn't saying that Christ only died for a select few and only merited salvation for a specific group make his sacrifice seem, I don't know, smaller or less valuable? Doesn't the universalist position that his death had enough merit to cover every single human being who ever lived sound far more generous, more loving, and more glorifying to Christ?
That is the exact emotional objection Owen anticipates and addresses. And his defense is incredibly counterintuitive, but it remains perfectly mathematically consistent with everything he has built so far.
Okay, how does he defend it?
He argues that universalism, despite its generous intentions, actually cheapens and degrades the merit of Christ.
How does offering it to everyone cheapen it?
Think about it from the perspective of ultimate efficacy. If Christ merited grace, faith, and glory for every single person on earth, but billions of those people never actually receive that grace and end up perishing in hell, then one of two things must be true in Owen's logical framework.
The traps just keep coming. Okay, what are the two options?
Option 1, God is unjust. Christ legally merited the salvation of all people, meaning God is legally obligated by justice to save them, but God is withholding a reward that is owed. He is refusing to pay the contractor for the work completed.
Which would make God corrupt, so we definitely can't choose option 1.
Exactly. So you are left with option 2. Christ's merit is defective and weak.
Ouch.
Right. He tried to merit salvation for everyone. He paid the price, but the payment wasn't actually powerful enough to secure the deliverance it supposedly purchased. It was a potential merit, a weak merit, that was ultimately defeated by human stubbornness.
Oh, wow. So if the atonement was universal in scope, but it fails in reality, it means the payment wasn't actually sufficient. It bounced.
Right. Owen says you are forcing a choice between a corrupt judge who won't honor a debt or an impotent savior whose payments don't clear.
It's the difference between a billionaire writing $1 million check to every single person on Earth, but knowing that 90% of those checks are going to bounce due to insufficient funds when people try to cash them, versus a billionaire writing $1 million check to a specific limited group of 10,000 people, and every single one of those checks clears the bank 100% of the time, immediately.
That is the absolute core of his argument regarding merit. The universalists claim they are honoring Christ by saying his check was written out to everyone. They think a wider distribution equals greater glory.
But Owen says,
you are dishonoring him by saying his checks bounce. Owen argues that guaranteed, unstoppable efficacy brings far more glory to the sacrifice than a broad potential but ultimately failing offer.
a targeted ransom that actually literally frees the prisoners is infinitely more valuable and praiseworthy than a universal ransom that leaves the vast majority of the world in chains.
Exactly. It is a ruthless devotion to consistency. He simply will not allow a gap between what is purchased and what is applied.
He refuses to let his opponents have it both ways. You cannot claim an infinite universal merit and then casually accept a limited failing outcome. He forces the cause and the effect to align perfectly.
Which is why his arguments are still debated today. They are structurally flawless, even if you hate the conclusions.
So, after climbing this absolute mountain of 17th century logic, where does this leave you, the listener? Let's connect this back to why we spent all this time unpacking the intricate details of a theological text published in 1647.
It's a fair question.
Regardless of where you fall on the theological spectrum, whether you are a Calvinist who agrees with Owen, an Arminian who vehemently disagrees with him, an atheist who thinks the whole debate is fiction, or anything in between, you have to respect the sheer, terrifying logical force of Book 3.
It truly is a masterclass in critical thinking and forensic debate. Owen shows us what it means to actually rigorously define our terms.
Right.
He refuses to let language become soft or pliable to suit emotional needs. If a word implies a transaction, like ransom, he demands to see the receipt. If a concept implies a logical dependency, like conditional faith, he tracks that dependency all the way back to its origin to see if it holds weight.
It really is the ultimate antidote to vague, feel-good information overload. We live in a world where politicians, marketers, and even friends constantly use these massive, weighty words like justice, freedom, reconciliation, and merit without ever defining the mechanics of how those things are actually achieved.
We just accept the feeling of the word.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We accept the emotional resonance of the word without checking the mathematical reality behind it. Owen forces you to look at the gears of the machine. He forces you to look at the structural integrity of the argument.
And he achieves this by constantly, relentlessly identifying the false dichotomies and the circular reasoning of his opponents. He doesn't let them hide behind emotional appeals to fairness or universal love.
No, he holds their feet to the fire of formal logic. He asks, if A is true and B is true, how can C possibly be the result?
It's a great exercise for any belief system, really.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the architectural brilliance of John Owen's Book 3, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. Something to mull over while you're driving or cooking dinner or just staring at the ceiling tonight.
I love this part.
We talked at the beginning about handing a simple contract over to a forensic auditor. Think about the foundational beliefs you hold in your own life right now. Your beliefs about justice, about fairness, about politics, about how society should function, or simply how the world works.
Give it the John Owen treatment.
Yes. If someone put your deeply held beliefs through the John Owen stress test, forcing every single premise to its absolute literal conclusion, demanding to know who paid for the conditions you've set up, demanding to see if your definitions actually match your observed reality, would your worldview hold up? Or would you find a massive contradiction hiding right in the center of your own personal philosophy?